Hi there and welcome to Hyundai Power Equipment. My name is Adrian and today we're going to look at the HY4BC31 petrol powered brush cutter. So I've laid the contents of the packaging out on the table here for you to see. First of all, we have the main head unit itself, which does have one of the handles attached. We have the second handle, we'll go through the assembly of that later. The handle mounting bracket. The lower part of the two-part shaft, we'll go through the assembly of this later. The strimming or trimming head. In this packet we have the brush cutting blade. The lower guard, we'll go through the assembly of that. The user's harness. The box spanner for changing the blades and for the spark plug. A Torx type wrench. An engine oil filler bottle. Now this holds exactly the right amount of oil around about. We'll go through that later. And finally, a comprehensive user manual. Now I do recommend that you read this thoroughly before use. So let's get on with some of the assembly. So we're going to start with the assembly of the handle. Now there are three parts to this upper handle. The left, the right, which is the one with the controls on. The bracket, which holds them together. And we're going to need the Torx type wrench. So the first thing we'll do is fit this bracket onto the main handle itself. Now you'll see that the screws that it's assembled with originally are quite loose, they're just put together loosely. So if any of these are missing, do check carefully inside your packaging. So I'm just going to put this handle, using the two screws, sandwich it over the upper tube here, just get the screw started, and fit the bracket loosely into position. Now this handle is going to fit on top of the main tube, so I'll just do them loosely. To fit it in position, and that's just finger tight for now. Now this bracket will slide up and down in relation to this shaft. When you've finished assembling it, you can actually slide it up and down to find the position that best suits you as far as the weight and what have you when you're using the harness. Obviously some people's arms are longer than others and you may find that a different position suits you better. So that's the main handle. So the next step will be to fit the actual handles into the bracket. So I've loosened these screws right off, and I'm going to fit this handle, the plain handle, on the left hand side looking down the shaft. I'll pick a point about halfway up the handle or halfway in and simply slide that into position there. Now I can put the handle side in and slide that one into position. Okay, and now I'll just loosely do up these screws. At this point I might need to use the wrench just to nip them, and I'll start off with these two handles at 90 degrees to the main shaft, and as you can imagine they will rotate forward or backwards. Again, you can set this to suit yourself to whatever you find the most comfortable position. And I'll just set those handles by tightening up the bottom two screws square to the engine. So there are 6 screws in total. The little Torx wrench does all 6, and I'll just nip those into position for now. So that's 2, 3, and the final one, 4. I can just flip it upside down and I'll just tighten the bottom too. Just nip them up for now. And that's the upper handle fitted. So as you can see, I've actually fitted these handles in a vertical position in relation to the shaft and a couple of inches down from the hanging bracket. As I said earlier, it can be slid up and down on this shaft, and you can rotate these handles forward and backwards in this orientation to whatever suits yourself. But just note that the controls are on the right hand side of the unit looking down the shaft, the on-off switch pointing to the inside towards the other handle. So that's the upper handles assembled. So my next step is going to be to fit the guard on the lower part down by the brush cutter head. So I need the lower part, the guard, and again the little Torx key. First thing I'm going to do is remove this screw from the lower guard. It should be just finger tight. If it's not in there, chances are that it's inside your packaging somewhere because it's only put in loose. Be very careful when you're throwing away your packaging that you haven't thrown anything away like this little screw. It's very simple to fit. You'll notice a tag as I'm holding it here with the cutting head towards me, a tag on the bottom and the screw hole on the top. The tag fits in the slot, and as you can see, the screw will go back through and into the hole that I've just taken it out of. I'll do it up finger tight, then using the Torx key, tighten it all the way. Making sure it's tight. And that's fitting the lower guard. So the little hole or slot in the cover, put the tag in the slot, close it up, and as you can see the two holes line up, and back in with the screw. And simply tighten up the screw until it's fully home. So let's move on to fitting either the bump head or the brush cutting head. We'll start with the bump head. Now, first thing to do is remove this nut on the bottom, and it is a left-handed thread on here, so to undo it, unconventionally we turn it clockwise and it will unscrew. Then we remove this part here, the donut shaped washer, and the next washer. This part here is the drive flange with an internal spline that matches the spline on the machine. We leave this on. On the same note, you'll notice that there is a hole here in the drive flange and a hole here on the outside of the casting. When we put that drive flange on, it's possible to lock the drive shaft into the housing by placing the Torx ended bit in through the matching holes. So on the side here, you'll find that you can then lock that off. Now again, to screw the bump head on, anti-clockwise would tighten it on. So we place it over, screw it on anti-clockwise, and holding the drive with our key, we can lock it off firmly. And that's how to fit the bump head. To remove the bump head, again, line up the two holes, put the locking key in through the two holes and loosen it by turning clockwise, and you can remove the bump head. To fit the trimming blade, what we need to do is first it will go on either way up. We need to put it on with the writing side facing towards the drive plate. And you will see that on the drive plate there is a raised register in the centre. It is important that you line this blade up with the writing facing the drive plate, and the drive plate fits through the hole in the centre. Now we'll put this washer on, which again has a dome facing upwards away from the blade. Thirdly, we put this little bump washer on, which goes on last, again, not this way, but this way up with the dome facing down, and then refit the nut, again, anti-clockwise to tighten it up. So exactly the same procedure. Line up the two holes in the drive flange, making sure that your blade stays on in the correct place, and tighten it down. Now at this stage we can take our box spanner and tighten up the locking nut, again anti-clockwise, all the way down until the blade is fully tight. This blade isn't super sharp, but probably advisable that when you're playing with this, it could well get sharp over use and you could cut yourself if you slip, so it's probably advisable that you wear gloves when fitting this blade. So I'll just check that this blade is free running and not all on the wobble, that way I know it's still sat on its register correctly. And that's it. That's the brush cutting blade fitted. So we fitted the upper handle in the approximate position where we want it. We fitted the lower guard, and we fitted, in this case, the brush cutting blade. So the next step we're going to do is to put oil in the engine and fuel the engine. Now the unit is sent to you with no oil in the engine. There may be a residual amount from where it was tested in the factory, but that has been drained out and there will be maybe a milliliter left in it. So it's very important that you fill the engine with engine oil before use, and I'll take you through that next. So, filling the engine oil. Now the engine oil required is a semi-synthetic SAE 10W30 engine oil, and I've got around a litre in this container here. Now the oil filler point is here on the back right hand side of the engine as you look from the pull start end, here. And you will notice that in your accessories you had this bottle. Now this bottle holds exactly the right amount of engine oil, or bar maybe a little bit, you may be able to tinker with it a little, exactly the right amount that you're going to need to fill the engine, and that's 60 millilitres. So what I will do, I won't do with this because it's a nice clean new bottle, would be to fill this bottle up to within a couple of millimetres of the cap here with the engine oil. So the next thing to do, I'll just tip it over, that's the horizontal flat position, I'll just tip it back onto its one handle and remove the oil filler cap. There. So what I would do was gradually pour the engine oil from this bottle into the engine, allowing it time to drop down. And when I got to probably 2/3 of the way down, I would tip the engine just until it's level. When the oil level is correct, the oil should be just at the weir point of this hole here. So just about to come flowing back out, but not flowing back out. If it drops back and the level is well below the top of these threads, I would then tip it up and probably pour in the last part of the bottle. But you can gauge it for yourself as you get towards the bottom of the bottle. Just check it now and again to make sure that the oil comes to exactly this point, or the weir point of that threaded hole. So once we're happy, it probably will take the full 60 millilitres. Once we're happy, we can then tip it back up onto the other handle and replace the filler cap. Again, it's a conventional thread, this one, so clockwise to tighten it and make sure that it's tight. So that would be the engine oil filled, and I do recommend that you would check this before each use. And the oil level check, again, just simply tip it onto the back handle, unscrew the cap, bring it down gradually onto level ground until it was level, and then the oil level should be just at the weir point of the hole. So that would be your daily check. Just tip it back, replace the filler cap, and that's your engine filled with a semi-synthetic SAE 10W30 engine oil. So let's move on to fueling your brush cutter. The first thing I will say is never refuel or fuel your brush cutter when the engine is hot. Should you inadvertently spill fuel over what could be a hot exhaust, it would be a very high risk of fire. So allow the engine to cool before filling with fuel. Now the fuel you will need will be fresh, unleaded petrol. No additives, no anything, just fresh, unleaded petrol. Unscrew the filler cap anti-clockwise and you can pull it to one side, and fill the tank with your fresh unleaded petrol up to a point about 25 millimeters from the top of the filler neck. So pretty much to the top of the tank here, but not to the top of the filler neck. This will allow room for the fuel to expand. So once you've filled it up with fuel, replace the filler plug, back in, tighten it up clockwise and just make sure that it's tight. And that's filling with fuel. So let's move on to the assembly of the two halves of the drive shaft. Now I've removed the bubble wrap from the outside, and you will notice that there is a cardboard piece in the end of here which you can discard. Similarly, on the lower part of the shaft there is this protective plastic cover. Now this has to be removed to assemble it, but plug it back on the end after use to avoid any dirt going down the shaft when you have got it disassembled. So we'll remove that. Now the drive shaft is in the centre of here, and you can see it there, and it plugs into a hole in the centre of the upper. On a similar note, you will see that there is a ball shaped press button here, like a ball detent, and a matching hole in the upper shaft. So the first thing we'll do is loosen off the blue plastic knob. You can remove it altogether, but you just need to loosen it off. Offer the two up together, push the button. You may have to wriggle it just to align the two shafts. There we go. Bring it back into line until the ball pops out of the hole. As you saw me do there, I had to rotate it just to line up the drive shaft in its receptacle in the upper handle. So having fitted the two together, I rotated it. As you see, I turned it so that I lined up the shaft and it popped in. Just turn it, the little button pops through the hole, and the final stage, tighten up the blue hand wheel here, which is on the other side. And that's assembling the two halves of the shaft. To disassemble, simply loosen off the hand wheel, push the little button, and you can pull the two halves apart. As I said earlier, plug the little protective cap back on the end to stop any dirt getting into the drive shaft. So that's assembling the two halves. So having put the engine oil in, fueled the unit, done most of the assembly, let's look at a few of the controls on the unit. So the first thing we've got is on the right hand handle here, the on-off switch. And you'll see that it says stop on this side and the letter 1 on that side. So that would be on and that would be off. So that's the on-off switch. Secondly, we have the throttle or trigger here. Now this back part is the lock which stops the throttle being able to be pulled. You need to push the rear lock and that allows the throttle to be pulled. So the use would be in the right hand. Once you push the rear handle, you can then use the throttle. So on-off switch, throttle and throttle lock. Let's move on to the controls on the engine itself. On the front of the carburetor here is this blue button, which is the choke, which you would use for a cold start. To turn the choke on, you simply push it in. If at any time you pull the throttle, I'll do that now, the choke will turn off. We'll go through the start procedure in a minute. But that is how you turn the choke on. Simply push down on that blue button until it clicks and stays in. I'll just turn it off. The next thing on the engine is the fuel primer bulb. If it runs out of fuel, or you've left it for a long time, or you're initially starting it, you will need to push this primer bulb several times to prime the fuel from the tank up into the carburetor. And you prime it just by pushing on the primer bulb like so. Several times it will need. Once you get to around 7 times, you will notice that this primer bulb is full of fuel, and that will be the engine primed. You may need to do it from time to time while you're using it. You know, if you leave it for a quarter of an hour or what have you, maybe a squirt or two just to keep this primer bulb full before attempting to start. And the final control would be the pull starter itself, which just simply pulls out from the back, very simply indeed. And there we are. There's no fuel, so it won't start. So those are the controls, and now that you've seen them all in close-up, I'll show you the starting procedure. For a cold start or initial start of the day, the first thing you need to do is to put the on-off switch into the on position. Then we would push the choke, the cold start button, in until it clicks back into its position. And then we would push the primer bulb, as I described earlier, several times to make sure that it's full of fuel. Once you've done this, simply pull start your brush cutter. It may take 2 or 3 times, but once the engine has started, leave it run for 3 or 4 seconds, and then maybe a little longer, we will see how it goes. And then as you pull the throttle and rev it up, it should then be running and the choke will turn off. If it fails to start, again, push the choke back in and retry, reprime, and pull again on the pull starter. But once it's started, maybe 10 seconds, but normally sort of 5 to 10 seconds at the most, I would have thought, then it's ready to use and you can rev it up. To stop the machine, the stop switch is here. Allow it to idle for around 20 seconds after you've used it, and then eventually switch it off. So I'll just run that through it again. Switch it on, choke on, prime several times, pull start until it starts, leave it 10 seconds or so, 5 to 10 seconds, then as you pull the throttle, it turns the choke off and it's ready to use. To stop, allow 20 seconds or so for it to idle down, cool down a little bit, and then switch it off. So that's the cold start procedure. Simpler if the engine is warm or hot. You simply switch it on. As long as that primer bulb is still full, which it should be if you've just been using it, you don't need to push the primer and pull start the engine. The engine will start, the choke isn't on this time, and when you pull the throttle, it's ready for use. Again, when it's time to stop, allow it time to idle, 20 seconds or so, and then switch the engine off. So that's the hot and cold start procedure. Next I'm going to move on and show you the harness. So I fitted the harness to myself. Now the harness is adjustable in many different directions. The shoulder straps, the position of the plate here on the hip, everything is adjustable, and it does have a quick release clip on the front here which simply clicks together so you can take the harness on and off. Now you'll see that it has a little spring clip which is normally on the right hip here, which simply clips over the little bracket of the machine, and as you can see, if I had the end of, it would be ready for use. I'll give you a close-up of this little clip and show you how it fits together. But as I said, this harness is multi-adjustable, for the larger or smaller person such as myself. If you are the sole user, you could then, tie these extra bits back, but it will fit quite a large person as well as, somebody fairly small like myself. So there we are. We've got the little loop on the top of the machine and the clip, and it simply clips in to attach yourself to the unit. To release yourself, just simply unclick it and it releases the machine. So having put the harness on, set everything up, tried it, seen how it felt, now would be the time, if you feel it necessary, to adjust the handle up and down, forward and backwards, the main handles on the unit. Once you find a position you're comfortable with, that would be the point to tighten up finally these 6 screws. But again, it's a trial and error, it depends how it feels for yourself, see what feels most comfortable, but it is adjustable in many, many different positions. Well, I do hope you found this demonstration useful. For more information on this or any of our other products, simply visit www.hyundaipowerequipment.co.uk. I've been Adrian, and happy gardening.